everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another video. So as of this week, I'm officially off of maternity leave and back to making videos. So I wanted to give you guys a quick update on my channel as to what the schedule is going to be, what my plan is. And I also wanted to share a little bit of my labor and delivery story of bringing my little girl into the world. So if you're here for the channel update part, that's going to be the first part of the video, and if you don't really care about baby stuff, you don't have to stick around. I get it, but that's going to be at the very end, and there might even be a very special guest coming on at the very end of the video, so stay tuned. So basically the plan is to keep doing what I was doing in January and February when I was on maternity leave. My plan is to have new videos up on Tuesdays. And there might be some weeks that are going to be no videos. There might be some weeks that I might be able to get a second video up. But basically, it's kind of difficult for me to record videos and also take care of my daughter at the same time, I've discovered. So it's been a little challenging to try to find time to even play The Sims, let alone record videos. And because I have to hold her if I'm here by myself, which I am most of the time because my husband works outside of the house. So during the week, during the daytime, it's just me taking care of her. And in the evenings when he's home, that's also my time to see him. So I really haven't had much of a chance to even play The Sims, let alone record videos. But I still want to keep going. It's just going to be not as many videos as I was doing beforehand. But I mean, to be fair, I kind of expected that this would end up happening, so there's that. So look for videos on Tuesdays, and again, be patient with me. There might be some weeks where there are no videos, but there also might be weeks where I have more time and I can get a second video up. You just never know. And of course, this will all change as she gets older, and hopefully I can do more videos as she gets older. You never know. We'll see. So yeah, so that's the channel update part of it. Now, moving on to the labor and delivery and baby part of the video. So if you don't want to watch this part, check out now. So first of all, I'm going to be referring to this. This is my pregnancy journal. And I had read a tip online back when I first became pregnant to start a journal. And I'm so glad I did, because honestly, there's been a lot of stuff that happened in the 40 weeks that I was pregnant, 40 and a half weeks that I was pregnant, that I kind of forgot about. And I actually brought this journal with me to the hospital and journaled through most of my labor. And when I couldn't journal anymore, I had my mom take over. So this has been really helpful. So yeah, I'm going to be referring back to this periodically, just so, you know, that's how I'm keeping track of things. But yeah, so my due date was January 6th. So basically I had a couple of goals for delivering my baby, at least as far as the schedule of things went. I wanted to make sure that I did not have her on Christmas Day, and I didn't want to have her on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. And my mom's birthday is January 4th, so I wanted to make sure that we didn't have her that day either, because I didn't want her to have to share her birthday with somebody else in our family. And so once I was past that point, I was good. January 6th came and went, no baby. I had a weekly appointment. Last 4 or 5 weeks of my pregnancy, you typically go in to see your OB like once a week. So on January 9th was my last appointment, and all along my OB and I had agreed that if she hadn't arrived on her own by January 13th, whatever that Sunday was, that I would be induced, because at that point I would have been 41 weeks, and at 41 weeks your placenta starts to age and it's no longer like helpful to the baby at that point. And so every day past 41 weeks, they've discovered is actually more dangerous. Like it used to be, I think 42 weeks, but now more doctors are pushing it back to 41. So I went into this appointment on January 9th fully expecting to be told like, okay, here's your instructions for being induced on Sunday. Like this is what time you'll need to be at the hospital, blah, blah, blah. And so going into the appointment, my husband has the option sometimes to work from home. So I had him work from home that day, and I was like, you know what? why don't you come to the appointment with me? And like, that way then, when they're giving me instructions, there's somebody else who is able to keep track of what's being told to me, because throughout all of my pregnancy, but especially near the end, I became very forgetful and very scatterbrained, and I wanted to have somebody else around who would remember the instructions. So he came, and you know, they go in, and at every appointment, they always have, they always check your blood pressure, they always check your weight, and then they always check your urine for like sugars to make sure that you haven't started having issues with that. So they checked my blood pressure, and it was a little bit elevated. It wasn't like hugely elevated, like not danger zone elevated, but it was a little high. And so they, you know, went through the rest of the exam, and my OB was like, okay, so at the end of your appointment, we'll check your blood pressure again, and if it's still elevated, then we need to talk about inducing you today. And I was like, what? Was not expecting that. So, but basically, her concern was that if they let it go any longer, that I could develop preeclampsia. And at that point, you know, then there's more harms for me, harms and risks for the baby. So she was like, there's really no benefit at this point. She's like, you're full term. We could go ahead and, you know, induce you today then. So end of the appointment comes, and of course my blood pressure is still slightly elevated. So she was like, all right, I'm gonna have you, you know, go down to the hospital. She's like, I'll call ahead, make sure that they have a labor and delivery room available for you. Because normally when you go in, it's just sort of hit or miss if there's a room that's available, unless you have something scheduled like a C-section. So she called down to the hospital ahead of time, and they had one room available. So she was like, all right, go grab a snack and grab your bags for the hospital, and you're gonna have a baby. I was like, okay, cool. Was not really expecting this to happen today. So I called my mom on the way home from the appointment, and I was like, hey, guess what? I'm being induced. So we stopped at Starbucks, grabbed some food to eat, because of course, once you're down there at the hospital, they don't let you eat. So this was like last meal before baby comes type of thing. Like, you want to make sure you have food in your stomach. And I guess the thought is that then if you end up needing a C-section and you have to be put under anesthesia, is that then you could end up like choking on your own vomit from food. So that's why it's just like typical. Any surgery, you're supposed to have an empty stomach beforehand. And because with childbirth, you don't always know, like if you go into it knowing you're definitely going to have a C-section, then they tell you ahead of time, like, hey, food cutoff time is this. But with a vaginal delivery, with the possibility, I mean, there's always a possibility you could end up needing a C-section, you just never know. So they err on the side of caution and say no food. So we ran home, we got our bags, we made arrangements for my parents to come pick up my dog, and we headed to the hospital, which was not really what I had planned on that day. So we got to the hospital around like 1, I want to say, it was like between 12:30, 1 o'clock. And they got me checked into a room, and I was officially induced at 1:30 in the afternoon. So they gave me a medicine called Pitocin that sort of forces your body into having contractions when it's not normally having contractions. I had been a little bit dilated for a couple of weeks going into it, but like not very much. I think I'd started off at like 37 weeks, I was like 1 centimeter dilated, and at 40 weeks, I was like 2. So like I had not really progressed a whole lot on my own anyways. So that's why I was also all along sort of thinking like, okay, this Sunday I'll probably be induced. But the Pitocin sort of forces your body to start having contractions with the help of this medicine. And then they also did something called a Foley bulb or a Foley catheter, which is basically a little balloon that they attach to your cervix that gradually expands, and over the course of a couple of hours, it forces your cervix to dilate a couple more centimeters. I think you can only do it up until like if you're too dilated, they can't give it to you. But like, because I was only 2 centimeters dilated, they could. So I think I went from like 2 centimeters to about 4 centimeters that afternoon. And holy crap, did that hurt. That was actually probably the most painful part of the whole process. I mean, like, bear in mind, later that day I got an epidural, so like the really bad painful contractions I never felt on my own. But the Foley bulb was terrible. I would like to avoid it again in the future if I possibly can. So they did that until about 4 in the afternoon that day, I want to say. And then at 4:30, another doctor from my OB's practice came in because she was actually down. I think she was there for like a C-section or something. There's 3 doctors and they all sort of like rotate turns who's like on call at the hospital. So she was down there because I think one of her patients had a C-section. So she came in and broke my water for me because it hadn't broken on its own. And when you get so far dilated, your water basically has to break to like force labor to continue to happen. So she did that. And yeah, then the rest of the evening was just contractions, continuing to dilate little by little, bit by bit. I did get a cup of orange jello for dinner, which was nice. I honestly, because I'd always heard like, you know, no food, but they count like jello, clear broth, apple juice, anything that's like a clear liquid, they count. So yeah, I had a lot of orange jello. And yeah, so then just pain, not really, really bad, but like I was starting to become more and more uncomfortable. And my nurse who came in at 7 that night, because I had known all along I wanted to have an epidural because I don't do pain. I really don't do pain. And I was like, I don't know what time, like at what point should I get it? And she made a very, very good suggestion that I have the epidural before the contractions get so painful that I can't have it inserted. Because if you aren't aware, the way an epidural works is they inject the epidural like medicine into your spine. And there's like a little plastic tube that kind of gets just attached to your back. And that's how then the epidural is connected through like an IV sort of thing. I don't know, I'm not a medical professional. But once it's in, you're fine, but the actual insertion process you have to be totally still for. So they have to time it out so that way then if you're having a contraction, like you can't move. And the further on your contractions get, you get to a point where you sort of like spasm and thrash, just sort of involuntarily. And if you do that while you're having the epidural inserted, it could be very bad because they're inserting it into your spine. So around, I want to say like at 8:45 that night, I was like, yeah, I want that epidural now. So they came in, I think at like 9:15, and by like 9:45, it was all done. It really wasn't that bad. I mean, like I had kind of heard some horror stories about the actual like getting the epidural part, and it really wasn't too terrible. I had to sit up in bed and kind of like lean over the side of the bed, and my wonderful, wonderful nurse held one arm and my husband held the other, and everybody was like in scrubs because like, I mean, it is sort of like a mini surgical procedure. And yeah, it really wasn't that bad at all. And then after that, oh my God, I felt so good. And I've always seen things like in movies and TV shows where it's like they got the epidural too soon and now they've run out and now she has all this pain. That's not actually how it works. So the epidural, because it's attached to you through an IV, they can always like refill it. So, once the first epidural bag ran out, then they could swap it out with another one. Which, by the way, did actually happen to me where my epidural ran out, and like when the bag runs out, an alarm goes off and it's really loud. And this happened in the middle of the night, and that night was kind of a rough night. And so I was like, oh my God, what is this sound? What is this sound? And so we hit the call button, but my nurse didn't hear it right away. And the person at the desk didn't contact my nurse. So it was like 30 minutes of me laying there like at like 3 in the morning without any pain medicine at all. And it was really uncomfortable. So we called again, and then my nurse actually heard the alarm going off, and she like walked down the hallway and she was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. So then when the anesthesiologist came back to refill my epidural, they had to give me like an additional shot of medicine to kind of like boost it, because then it's like once it runs out, you have to like power it up a little bit more once it comes back, if that makes sense. So you never want to be totally out is the point. Like it has to overlap. And because obviously mine didn't, it was painful. So yeah, so that was the night. At one point, they had me laying on my side because my baby was kind of like off to the right side. Like she should have been centered and she was not. So they tried to use gravity to help move her back into position to where she needed to be so I could deliver her. And so they would have me lay on one side, then on the other side. At one point I had like this big, what they called a peanut ball, which was basically like this big foam peanut that they had me like stick between my legs to kind of like help coax baby into the right position naturally. The worst part was that, so laying on the left side was fine. When I went to lay on my right side though, I had terrible heartburn, like so bad. It got so bad I actually wound up throwing up from how bad my heartburn was, which, keep in mind, I basically had nothing in my stomach at this point because all I'd been able to eat was these orange Jell-O cups. I did actually, right before I threw up, I had a glass of apple juice, which was really good. But up until very recently, I haven't been able to have anything apple related because I basically threw it straight up. And then the medicine that they gave me at that point for heartburn, because there's so few things that you can take at that point, the medicine that they gave me, I don't remember what it was, but it tasted so bad. It was like bitter and just super gross. It made me throw up again immediately. So they were like, all right, we'll just have you lay on your left side then, because clearly laying on the right side is just not working out. So yeah, so that's kind of how things then progressed through to the morning. And then by like 1 in the afternoon on January 10th, I was finally at 9 centimeters dilated. This was almost a full 24 hours after I had initially been induced. So, you know, labor was going very slowly. And so they kept turning up the amount of Pitocin I was on. They kept having me move from one side to the other. The other thing is that with an epidural, you're not allowed to get up because your bottom half of your body is basically totally numb. So I couldn't get up and go to the bathroom anymore, which meant I had to have a catheter, which was so fun. No, not really. I mean, like, it actually wasn't that bad. I've always thought that, like, oh, the catheter has to be in the whole time, but no, apparently not. I don't know. Apparently medical TV shows are not like the way to get information. Oh, I forgot to mention this. So before, I think it was before the epidural, they had these monitors that were like these big, thick belts that went around my waist, and one of them was monitoring my contractions and the other one monitored my baby's heart rate. So because obviously then if baby is in distress and her heart rate goes up or like drops, they need to know about it like right away. However, because my child is stubborn and kind of a stinker, she wasn't staying in a good enough position to constantly be on the monitor. Like, she almost had like too much room to move around. And so she kept coming off of the monitor, which meant they couldn't monitor her heart rate, which was just bad news. So they switched from the belt monitors to an internal monitor, which actually, that also was very uncomfortable. So they attached a monitor for me inside of, I actually don't know where inside of me they put it. It was inside of me. Let's just leave it at that. That would track my contractions. And then they also attached a heart rate monitor to the top of my baby's head, which the monitor for me, they didn't really have issues with. The monitor for her, of course, they did. They had a hard time getting it to stick on her head. So they actually had to try it. The first attempt didn't work at all. The second attempt did, and then came off as the doctor's hand was like leaving me. And then they had to put it in a third time, and finally the third time it stuck. However, then at 11:30 or so in the morning the next day, the monitor on the top of her head came off again. So for the time being, because only a doctor could actually insert those monitors, they had to go back to the belt monitors until they could get a doctor to come in and reinsert again. So for a couple hours I went back to the belt, which actually I didn't really like the belt monitors. Like as uncomfortable as the application of the internal monitors was, I didn't actually mind it so much because it didn't like feel like anything like once it was there. Whereas with the belt, it had to be really tight around me. And so it got to the point where it was kind of itchy and just uncomfortable because like, 40 weeks pregnant, I'm large, and I have these two big, like they were like probably 2 or 3 inches thick, like, this way, belts around my stomach as I'm having contractions. Like it was just so uncomfortable. So I was actually kind of grateful when they went back to the internal monitors again, because even though the application of it kind of sucked and it hurt, once it was in, I didn't feel it. So then the rest of the afternoon was just trying to get me past 9 centimeters because you have to be 10 to deliver. And so they would have me lay one way and turn up the Pitocin and check me. Have me lay another way, turn up Pitocin, check me. Every couple of hours. And so finally at probably about 5 o'clock or so, I did not know this at the time, but one of the other nurses came in and just sort of set a piece of paper down on one of the tables in my room and didn't really say anything about it and just sort of walked away. So I didn't even notice this person entering my room at this point. But my husband saw it and he went over and looked at it, and it was a release form for having a C-section. So basically it got to the point where, because after the 24-hour point of your water breaking, you have to deliver pretty quickly after that point, because your water helps keep infection out. So if your water has broken, then infection can get in, and it can be dangerous for you and dangerous for the baby. So because at like 4:30 the day before, they had artificially broken my water for me, I needed to have this baby like soon. So they were giving me one more chance, and if my cervix hadn't dilated to 10 centimeters, they were going to do a C-section, which, like, I didn't really want to have a C-section, but most importantly was just having my baby here healthy and happy. So like, obviously if the C-section was what needed to happen, I was on board with it, but I also didn't really want to have to like revert back, because if you go into having a C-section in the first place, like you're ready for it. Whereas if you've already been in like vaginal labor for a while, it's more uncomfortable. And also just like mentally, you kind of have to like shift gears. So thankfully when my, actually it wasn't even my OB, it was actually the same doctor who had broken my water the day before, because by this time my doctor's on-call shift had ended. So this other doctor from my OB's practice came in and checked me at like 6:45. I was 10 centimeters dilated. Hooray. So at that point they, did like this magical switch over in the room where like, suddenly the bottom half of the bed disappeared and this tray comes out and like with all these things on it, and so I started pushing at 6:52. this is what was kind of strange. So Pitocin, because it's artificially giving you contractions, and I was still on Pitocin at this point, my contractions should have been very regular. They were not. So I'm not really sure why they weren't, but they weren't. So like I would have a couple of contractions and then nothing. Whereas typically either naturally or with the Pitocin at this point, your contractions would be like pretty consistent, like every 30 seconds lasting 10 seconds or longer, you know, like on a schedule. Mine were not. They were kind of all over the place, which is important because when you go to push, they tell you when to push based upon your contractions. So they could see when they were about to start, but they weren't consistent. So I started pushing at 6:52. I probably pushed 12, 13 times total, maybe. And actually, so this was funny. So with the internal monitor, I couldn't hear my baby's heart rate anymore. With the belly band external monitor, when she was hooked up to that, I could hear the beeping. But with the internal monitor, I couldn't hear it. They just had like a visual. And so, flip that. With the belly band, it was just a visual. With the internal, I could hear it because right before my last push, I was listening to my daughter's heartbeat and I was like thinking like, okay, so this is like a little bit faster than the Stars and Stripes Forever. I'm gonna guess it's probably 140 beats per minute. And I looked at my nurse and I was like, is her heart rate about 140 right now? And she looks at the monitor and she looks back at me and she's like, yeah, it's exactly 140. She was like, what are you, Rain Man? I was like, no. I was like, I studied music in college. Like tempos just sort of come naturally to me. And she was like, oh, okay. And she sort of like made a face to the doctor like, what? But yeah, so I thought that was just kind of cool. Like right before I gave birth, I was able to accurately guess what my daughter's heart rate was, 140 beats per minute. I was pretty proud of myself. But yeah, so pushed 12, 13 times. She came right out and she was born at 7:30 p.m. exactly on January 10th. So I was induced at 1:30 on the 9th and gave birth at 7:30 p.m. on the 10th. So I wound up being in labor for like 30 hours. And yeah, it was a very long time. But I mean, so worth it in the end. And I have to say, like, everybody at the hospital, the doctors, the nurses, the PSAs, everybody was just so wonderful. I mean, like, really, really awesome people. I'm someone who has a hard time asking people for help. And when you're laying in a hospital bed, it's like kind of imperative sometimes that you have to ask somebody for help. But I don't know, like they all made me feel so comfortable and I was very impressed. But yeah, so 7:30 p.m. my daughter was born. We named her Mary Margaret. Her first name, Mary, is after my husband's two grandmas who were both named Mary. And her middle name, Margaret, is after one of my grandmas. So very important family names to us. I also, after I gave birth and I had posted pictures online, I used the hashtag Mary Margaret, and then I got, apparently there was a character on Once Upon a Time whose name is also Mary Margaret, and so I got a lot of people who were like, oh my god, did you name her from, I'm like, no, literally never seen that show. It's a family name, but you know, that's cool. But yeah, so I'm gonna go see if she's ready to make a special appearance. This will, yeah, we'll just go ahead and say definitely be the only time she will be making an appearance on this channel. So if you want to see her, now's your chance. So this is my daughter, Mary Margaret. She's only been up in the office a couple of times, so she's a little distracted by things. But yeah, so she is currently 7 weeks old, 7.5 weeks old. So she's no longer a newborn, which is sad because apparently newborn is only for the first month. So she is officially an infant. Her hobbies include spitting up a lot, making really big poops, taking naps, She does really like staring at lights, and oh, okay, we're getting upset now. I'm sorry. But yeah, she likes staring at lights and her mobile, and she's started smiling in the past week or so, although she doesn't seem to be doing that right now. Yeah, you're okay. You're okay. There we go. Yeah. But yeah, so this is her. This is why my videos aren't going to be coming out as frequently as they were before, but you know, I think she's a pretty cute reason for that. But yeah, so anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, you can do so down below. And I will see you guys on Tuesday. Bye.